us more about that product strategy stack. I think it's a bit controversial in some elements,
Yeah.
especially the ordering. So can you walk us through that?
So the idea with the product strategy stack came out of this notion that when people talk about product strategy, they tend to conflate lots of different things together: priorities, goals, roadmap, mission, vision. And so everyone means something a little bit different when they talk about strategy. And that makes it much harder to define and develop a strategy that really works for the company. And so what the product strategy stack does is it attempts to pull apart those different terms into a set of concrete concepts that a team can use to develop their strategy top down, and then to really understand if their strategy is working bottoms up. And so there's 5 elements of the strategy stack. The top level is the company mission. What does the company want to accomplish in the world? The next level is the company strategy, which is what is the rigorously logical plan for the company to be able to achieve its mission. If you have a mission, you need a strategy to achieve that mission. The company mission and the company strategy work together to really define the context that is defining the work of the product team. Because ultimately, the goal of the product team is to have product to be a lever for the company strategy, to help the company be successful. And product is just one piece of that success. And so the company mission and the company strategy set the overall company objectives that the product team can then use to figure out what is the right product strategy. And so the next level is the product strategy. And then the final 2 layers are product roadmap and product goals. And so product strategy sits in the middle between the company objectives and the day-to-day work of the product team. So whereas the company strategy is what is the rigorously logical plan that we're going to use to achieve our company mission, the product strategy is what is the product's role in that overall company strategy? What is the glue that connects what we're doing on the product team with what we need to achieve as a company? And then once you have a clear product strategy, you can define 2 things. One is your product roadmap, which is what are you going to build and why and in what order. That's where that strategic sequencing piece comes in and is really important. And then the next piece is what are the product goals? How do you actually measure whether or not you're making progress on your roadmap and you're making progress on your strategy? And so collectively, those 5 steps, the company mission, the company strategy, the product roadmap, and the product goals, give you a framework with which you can use to, working from the top down, define a really tight, coherent product strategy. And then if you are trying to understand, is our product strategy working, you can work your way bottoms up through the stack to really understand that. Are you hitting your goals? If not, then your roadmap might be wrong. And if your roadmap isn't working, maybe your product strategy is off, or maybe the company strategy or the company mission isn't providing enough context. So that's how people can use that kind of stack of ideas to both define and debug their product strategy.
I love how the product strategy stack for me is connecting company strategy ultimately to a roadmap of what people are building. And as we talked about at the beginning, that strategy execution gap, that's often the case where you just get this hodgepodge of features. It might be what the VP of sales wanted, what the CTO wanted, and then there's just a few product things left in there. But here we're trying to connect the 2. And I think it's solving one of those key problems. So that is one reason I love the ordering. Now, one thing that I tend to get hung up on, and I think other people who have talked to you about this have also mentioned this, so I'm curious what the overall reaction has been, is having goals come after roadmap. Because I think what the case people make for why having goals after roadmap can be bad is because it tends to lead to less empowerment of the product teams, because they, instead of owning, like, let's say a metric, and if we believe that outcomes matter more than outputs, they start to own these roadmap feature items, or they start to make commitments to those roadmap feature items. And that sometimes inhibits their ability to have said something in a product review, discover something, quickly change it, and then ship that, versus what they had said in the product review to executives. So I'm curious, like, how you deal with that tension. I'm sure a lot of people have brought it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things. So definitely controversial in just my opinion. So people can, approach this stuff in any way that makes sense. One thing that kind of guides the overall thinking here is that goals is actually the output of strategy, not the input to strategy. I think a lot of times companies can sort of get themselves in a tricky place where they say, our strategy is to increase revenue by 10%. And actually, that's not your strategy. That's a goal. And, you could achieve it in certain ways. You cannot achieve it in other ways. The only way that you're going to really, have a high probability of achieving it is if you understand what your positional advantages are and how you're going to execute on that strategy really well. So the product strategy stack is one where the mission is the thing that starts at top, and then the goals come out of the bottom. Specifically to the question of, does the roadmap come first or do the goals come first? I like to use the analogy of a road trip. If, I'm going from LA to Palm Springs, it's about 100 miles. It's about a 2-hour journey. And I'll know that I've gotten there after driving for 2 hours. But if I don't have a clear roadmap, if I don't know that I'm going to Palm Springs, then that goal of driving for about 2 hours is actually meaningless. And I think that that's what happens with a lot of product teams, is they set a goal absent the context, and whether or not they hit or don't hit that goal, it's sort of absent of meaning. If you hit the goal, what does that mean? How is that providing evidence that you've made progress on your strategy? So the goal of driving 2 hours makes sense if I know I'm going to Palm Springs. But if I just decide I want to drive 2 hours from LA, there's lots of different places that I can go. There's lots of different destinations. And who knows if I'm going to reach the right one. And so the product roadmap provides a framework with which to understand what is the core set of things that we're doing from a product standpoint, and how do we want to sequence them over time. And the product goals help us understand if our roadmap isn't working. And I think one of the missing pieces here that has caused a lot of confusion or consternation is there's still a set of things that the product team creates relative to the goals. They create a set of feature strategy. They create a backlog. There's a bunch of things that they build. So the goal is not for the product roadmap to be so fine-grained and so specific that it gives the product team no ability to maneuver. The product roadmap should be at a level that's high enough that it provides some guardrails. So it provides an overall direction and makes sure that the team is aligned. And then, there's lots of different ways, once you know what the roadmap is, to figure out what is the right way to build towards that and to understand whether or not from a goal perspective you're making progress.
Got it. Okay, so it sounds like it's not necessarily that the roadmap is committing to specific features or meant to constrain the product team in any way. This is like a slightly broader definition of a roadmap, maybe a roadmap that's more focused on some of the problems you want to solve or some of the high-level direction your feature might be going, but it's not like a commitment to anybody that this is what we're going to build.
No, it's really a destination, and then your goals are relative to that destination. So in the road trip example, if we know we're going to Palm Springs, we can take lots of different routes. You can decide if you want to stop along the way. You can decide if you want to detour. There's many different ways to get there. And so the roadmap is really about defining at a very high level what are the things, the big initiatives from a product standpoint that the product team is committing to deliver, rather than being really specific about what is the team doing day to day.
Makes sense.
So roadmap, I think, is often on the level of months or quarters rather than days and weeks.
Makes sense. So it's maybe not what people traditionally visualize as like a Gantt chart. These are the features we're going to deliver. It's much more of a conceptual problems to solve, direction we're going type of roadmap, in which case I'm completely aligned with that ordering as well. The next question I have is, who should be defining what level of the stack? So if you take like a traditional Marty Kagan approach, the product strategy, that is the job of product leaders. So people with titles kind of like group product manager through to CPO. And the roadmap, that often comes down to like the actual PMs on the team as being owners. And I'm not sure who would own the goals in this case, maybe like a data analyst or the PM. Is that how you intend it to be used as well, or how you see it and recommend it?
I think it really depends on the situation. So part of what I've tried to do with the frameworks that I've shared is to share things that are really practical. And I think practically, different organizations approach strategy in different ways. Some organizations will have very product-oriented CEOs. They'll be small enough that the CEO will kind of have a feeling for what they want all the way from the top of the stack to, the specific roadmap and goals. And so oftentimes those CEOs are defining a lot of that. The head of product might define a lot of that. In a bigger organization, there's more room to say that, there's different levels in the organization that should be defining at different levels of that stack. And so one of the things I encourage product leaders to do is to figure out your comfort level in terms of what to enable your team to contribute to. And certain product leaders will have these incredibly high performing teams, and they'll be like, I don't need to worry about the product strategy and the roadmap. I've got people on my team. I know that they're going to be able to execute really well on that. I just need to make sure that they have a company level understanding of what our mission is, what our strategy is, what are some of the things that we're trying to solve for. Other product leaders may say, I'm looking at my team, I just don't have a senior enough team, or I'm just not seeing the ability for the team to be able to operate at that more strategic level, and I need to get a lot more detailed. The goal ultimately is to enable your team so that they can define the goals, define the roadmap, and define the product strategy. But the stack gives a framework for which to be able to think about, do you have a team where they have that level of capability and where you can give them that level of trust and autonomy, or do you need to provide more specific, more granular guardrails, and then kind of show by example what a really good product strategy looks like, and then help them level up over time so that then the product leader can zoom out. And that goes to that point we talked about earlier around dynamic range. Part of dynamic range is being able to kind of zoom into the details and zoom out. And a key part of that is being able to figure out how to do that well with your team. What's the right level to zoom into to give them the right level of support? And for some teams, that'll be at a very zoomed in level of view, and you'll need to provide really detailed support. And for other teams, you can zoom out a little bit more and provide them with more autonomy.
Makes sense. So now I want to peel back one more layer of the onion, specifically on the product strategy layer of that stack. Can you walk us through, what are the key components, or maybe an example, since they tend to vary so much, of a really great strategy document, product strategy document?
Yeah, definitely. So I've shared one on the Reforge Artifacts site. It's TripAdvisor Travel Hub. So a few years ago, this was actually a while ago now, we had to answer the question of how do we deliver a much better travel planning experience on TripAdvisor so that people can come to the site, and rather than kind of come sort of intermediated through Google each time, they can come to the site, set up a trip, and then start to save things to that trip. The goal being to engage them more deeply in the trip planning process so that they do more of that trip planning through TripAdvisor directly rather than intermediated through Google. And as part of doing that, we had a really hard set of strategic things that we needed to solve for. The TripAdvisor product at the time was heavily optimized through A/B testing. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future or later on in the conversation. And moving key parts of the product around had the risk of potentially cannibalizing key parts of the site and of the business. And so we knew we needed to develop a strategy that was really clear, that was able for everyone to understand, where we could measure whether or not that strategy was successful. And so we put together a format for the strategy document, which I still use to this day. I've done it multiple times. I've used it at Tinder. I've used it with startups that I've been advising. And the central part of that strategy document is 15 to 20 wireframes that answer the question of what will the product look like if we execute really well on this strategy. And the reason to use wireframes and not just to describe things is that product in most cases is a very visual medium. We're ultimately putting an interface in front of a user, and individual decisions, individual design decisions, for example, can be product strategy decisions. So just deciding which of the 5 icons go on the bottom of your mobile app is a strategy decision. You're deciding what are the 5 most important elements of our business that we want to surface to users. And if you just describe that in text and you don't show it visually, it's really hard for anyone to have sort of a coherent understanding of the strategy. Everyone sees the strategy document and walks away with a different perspective on things. And the analogy I like to use here is it's a little bit like if you're building or renovating a house. If you were to go to an architect and they gave you a Word doc instead of a blueprint, there's no way you would, hand over your money to have them execute on that renovation, because you wouldn't have a clear enough understanding of what is actually going to get built. You need a blueprint. You need to be able to see it visually in order to have confidence in what the output is going to be. That same thing that applies to architecture also applies to products. And so it's really important, I think, to have a visual component to strategy documents.
Pipelines.